The day I found the plan for my death was a Tuesday, and it began with something as small and harmless as a cracked phone screen. You need to understand this first. I was not a woman who lived inside chaos. I was 67, retired, the kind of quiet wife people forget to look at twice. I had been married to the same man, Dr. Victor Marsh, for 42 years. He was the dentist everyone in Port Harbor trusted. I was the librarian people sent their grandchildren to when they struggled to read. We were, from the outside, a success story. No scandals, no police, no money problems, 3 grown children, church every other Sunday. If you had asked anyone on our street which marriage would blow up like a thriller, no one would have pointed to ours. That is why what I saw in his phone felt so violent. He left the phone on the kitchen counter that morning, face down next to the sugar jar, the glass still spidered from where he'd dropped it in the driveway. He was rushing clinic day. Crown work. A long case. He kissed my cheek, told me not to wait up if billing ran late, and walked out whistling. I wiped the counter and, without thinking, slipped the phone into my purse. It was a wife thing. A small kindness. I would get it fixed for him so he wouldn't have to remember. I didn't know I was carrying a loaded weapon into town. At 3 p.m., I picked it up from Alvarez Tech and Repairs. I had known Marco for 15 years. He'd fixed my daughter's laptop, my grandson's tablet, my own old phone. I trusted him. But when I walked in that day, he didn't greet me the way he usually did. He looked past me, walked to the door, and locked it. Then he said my name in a way people only use when there is bad news. Eleanor, I need you to listen to me very carefully. My heart actually slowed. Did something happen? The screen is fine, he said. That's not the problem. The problem is what I saw while I was testing it. I shouldn't have opened it. I know that. But I did. And what I saw, Eleanor, I don't think you're safe. I almost laughed. I am 67, I thought. Who would want to hurt me? But he turned the phone around and opened the Messages app, and the laugh died before it reached my throat. He had opened a hidden list of scheduled texts. Not texts that had been sent. Texts that were waiting to be sent. All to the same number. All to a woman named S. Cole. All talking about me in the past tense. One said, "Policy is ready. Her records show cognitive issues. No questions if it looks sudden." Another said, "Practice should sell for 2.62. 8M. I'll be executor. We can move right away." The last one was set to send on January 15. "It's done. Funeral was yesterday. I'll see you in Sarasota." There is a silence that doesn't exist in normal life. It's not the quiet of being home alone. It's the quiet of every memory in your body stopping at once. The man who slept in my bed. The man I fed. The man I defended to our children when he forgot birthdays. That man had picked a date for my funeral and told another woman. I looked at Marco. Is this some kind of joke? A draft? A story he's writing? "No," he said, and his voice was low, serious. "These are live scheduled messages. If you hadn't brought this phone in, these would have gone out automatically. Your husband is planning something, and he is documenting it. That is arrogance, or he's sure no one will believe you, maybe both." Something inside me shifted. I had heard rumors lately, small, harmless ones. Victor telling the hygienists I was getting forgetful. Victor telling our son I'd mixed up names. Victor telling our daughter I didn't like to drive anymore. I had ignored it. We get older. People say things. But now I saw it clearly. He wasn't talking. He was preparing. He was setting up the stage where the audience would already think the actress was fragile before she disappeared. In that moment, every safe thing in my life became evidence. My kindness, my age, my marriage, my reputation as a quiet woman. All of it could be turned against me. If I went home and screamed, I would be hysterical. If I confronted him with no proof, I would be confused. If I told my children, he would show them a neat little file about Mom's forgetfulness. And this woman, this S. Cole, who I would later learn had done this before, would slide in and sell everything my husband and I had built. I took a breath and did what older women learn to do. I did not panic where anyone could see me. "Marco," I said. "You're going to copy every single thing you saw. You are going to send it to me and to yourself. You are going to act like nothing is wrong. And I'm going to walk out of here and cook dinner for a man who thinks I will be dead on January 15." He stared at me. "You're not going to the police?" "Not yet," I said. "Right now it's his phone and my word. Right now he still has the white coat and the town's trust. Right now he can say, 'I misunderstood.' If I go too soon, I lose. I have to get ahead of his story." That is the moment my story really begins, not when he planned to kill me, but when I decided I would not let him control the narrative of my death. If you're watching this video right now, take a second to support the channel. Subscribe so I can keep telling stories like this, because a lot of people over 60 are living inside families that think they're weak. Like the video, share it, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from, city, state, or country. We love seeing how far these stories travel, and it truly helps me keep making more chapters for you. Now let me ask you something, because this is where I always wonder what other women would have done. Imagine you are 67 and you find proof, real proof, that your husband is planning your death and has already told another woman what day your funeral will be. Which path would you choose? A. Confront him that night at the table, risk him gaslighting you but force the truth into the open. B. Pretend you don't know, gather more proof quietly, and make a move only when you can't be discredited. Tell me which one you would choose, A or B, and tell me why. I want to read your answer, because the choice you make in that moment decides whether you survive the rest of this story. The morning after discovering those messages, I woke before the sun, staring at the ceiling as the first gray light slid across the room. The house was silent, almost too silent. Victor was already gone, off to his practice, the way he always was by 6. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock over the stove, ordinary sounds that suddenly felt like ghosts of a life that had already ended. I turned on my side, looking at the space he'd left behind on the pillow, and thought, that is where a man sleeps who plans his wife's funeral. I dressed slowly, as though movement might alert him across town. My hands shook while buttoning my cardigan, but my mind was sharp, sharper than it had been in years. The fear had burned something away, leaving only clarity. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared 1,000 breakfasts, and opened my notebook. The first page was blank. At the top, I wrote, October 12, Evidence. I began listing everything I knew, the scheduled messages, the policy, the woman, the fake talk about my memory. Each entry I dated and numbered, as if cataloging library cards again. A lifetime in the library teaches you how to order chaos. That morning, order became my weapon. At 9, I drove into town. Not to the police, not to the bank, to the place I had always gone when I needed to find truth, Port Harbor Public Library. I'd spent most of my life there, first as a clerk, then as head librarian. The brick building on the corner of Main and King had always felt like an extension of my own lungs, quiet, filled with breath and pages. Inside, the familiar scent of paper and dust steadied me. Behind the circulation desk was Marion Blake, my oldest friend, short and steady as a stone. She looked up and smiled before her eyes caught my face. "Eleanor," she said, "what's happened?" I closed her office door and told her everything. Marco's call, the messages, the policy, the woman's name. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she sat back, her fingers steepled under her chin. "You're sure the name was S. Cole?" "Yes." She turned to her computer. "Let's see who our mystery woman is." I watched the reflection of her screen flicker across her glasses as she searched. "Sabrina Cole," she murmured after a few keystrokes. 43, business consultant, operates out of Boston and Portland, specializes in medical and dental practice transitions. Transitions, what an elegant word for theft. "She's worked with 12 practices across New England," Marion continued, clicking through pages. "Some closed after sudden deaths of the owners. Look here, Beverly, Massachusetts. Dentist found dead in his garage, carbon monoxide. Case ruled accidental." She clicked again. "Another in Connecticut. Heart attack. She was advising him too. No charges ever filed." I felt cold spread up my spine. She finds men near retirement, I whispered. Men with money, insurance, and wives they think are in the way. Marian nodded slowly, and she makes them disappear. We printed everything: news clippings, business filings, licensing documents. Marian made copies of Victor's company registry, highlighting where Sabrina's name appeared as consultant. Every page was a nail in a coffin, neither of them expected to lie in. But information alone wouldn't save me. I needed proof of intent, something that could speak louder than a respected dentist's reputation. So I made a decision that went against every instinct I had. I would act like nothing had changed. I would become what he thought I already was, a soft, distracted wife. That night I cooked dinner as usual: roast chicken, rosemary, mashed potatoes. When Victor came home, he kissed my cheek, poured himself a glass of wine, and told me about a patient who'd bitten him during a filling. I smiled. I laughed where I was supposed to. I pretended to forget the salt, and I wrote down everything he said once he went to bed. For a week I played that part. I let him think I was fading. I let him repeat stories I forgot. I even left the milk out once on purpose. He smiled kindly and said, "It's okay, sweetheart. You've been tired lately." He didn't know I was building a record, each word, each condescending tone, each subtle maneuver to make me look weaker. Then, one Thursday, he brought home Dr. Leonard Price, our family physician. They came in together, cheerful, too cheerful, with a folder in Price's hand. "Ellie," Victor said, "Dr. Price just wants to run through a few questions. Nothing serious. You've seemed a little off lately." I felt my throat tighten. "Off?" "Just small things," he said. "Names, dates. Remember when you forgot the car keys last week?" Keys I had left on purpose. Price smiled, professional and falsely warm. "It's just a standard cognitive screen, Eleanor. We do them for all our patients over 65. I let him start. The date, the season, the president, counting backward by sevens. I answered each one clearly, slowly, calmly. Then, halfway through, I stopped. "Doctor," I said, "when exactly did I take this test last month?" He blinked. "Last month? You're holding a file that says September 19th. I was in Boston that day for the Retired Teachers Conference. I have receipts, photos, hotel confirmation. So I'd like to know, who filled out that test with my name on it?" Price's eyes darted to Victor, who froze. The silence in the room cracked like a shell. I walked to him and took the folder from his hands. The header font was wrong. The address of his office was mistyped. The signature at the bottom was Victor's handwriting, not mine. "You forged a medical record," I said. "Both of you, to make me look incompetent." Price stammered. "Eleanor, let's not—" "Get out," I said. My voice was steady, colder than I knew it could be. "Before I decide to call the medical board." He left without another word. When the door shut, Victor turned to me, the mask gone. "You've been talking to someone," he said. "Marco? Marian? Who else?" "I don't know what you mean," I said. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think you can turn this around on me? I've been documenting your decline for months. Everyone believes it. The kids, the staff, the neighbors. Who do you think they'll trust, an old woman who forgets her own purse, or the husband who's been taking care of her?" It was a threat, quiet and rehearsed. He believed his version of reality was unbreakable. That was his mistake. After he went upstairs, I went into the basement and opened the old cedar trunk that held decades of our family papers, tax returns, mortgage statements, insurance policies. I found the life insurance documents with both our signatures. One line caught my eye: primary beneficiary Victor B. Marsh. That night, I changed it. I called the company's emergency line and requested a beneficiary update form, citing household separation. The woman on the phone hesitated, but I used my calmest librarian voice, the one that always made people listen. By morning, I had transferred the policy to my eldest daughter, Daniel's wife, quietly, legally, irrevocably. When Victor woke, I was at the kitchen table again, sipping coffee, my pen steady. "Could you pick up milk after work?" I asked sweetly. He smiled, satisfied that his story still worked. But what he didn't know was that I had already taken the first step in rewriting it. The next move would be his, and for the first time in 42 years, I was ready for it. For the next several days, Victor behaved as though nothing had happened. He left for work at dawn, came home at 6, poured his nightly glass of red wine, and asked about trivial things, weather, bills, the church bazaar, but every smile looked rehearsed. Every question was a test. I could feel him watching me now, searching for proof that his plan had been discovered. I had learned how to wear masks long before I met him. A librarian spends her life performing calmness. People trust quiet voices. So I let him see what he wanted: a tired woman grateful for care, a wife too small to be dangerous. Meanwhile, I moved in silence. I began checking the mail before he did. In the third envelope, I found a statement from Marsh Dental Associates showing a $60,000 transfer to a consulting firm I had never heard of. The firm's name was Cole Strategic Transitions. There it was, her name, hidden in paperwork like a ghost signing the walls of my life. That afternoon, I went to the bank. I didn't withdraw money. That would be noticed. I simply opened a new account under my maiden name, Eleanor Davis, and shifted small sums every day. $400 from savings, $250 from a refund check, $300 from an unused credit line. I told the clerk it was for a book project. She smiled, polite, not knowing she was helping me build an escape route. The next day, I made an appointment with Dr. Raymond Chen, the neurologist who had treated Victor's brother years ago. I told him it was about family history. What I really needed was documentation that my mind was intact. After an hour of memory tests and problem-solving puzzles, Dr. Chen said, "Mrs. Marsh, you have the cognitive sharpness of someone 20 years younger. Why the sudden concern?" I told him, not everything, just enough, that someone was saying I was confused, that I feared a misunderstanding could cost me control of my affairs. He nodded gravely and wrote a formal statement declaring me fully competent. He signed it, sealed it, and handed it to me. I slipped it into my notebook, the same notebook that now held Victor's messages and the article about the 2 dead dentists. By then, the story of my forgetfulness had begun to spread. Neighbors stopped mid-sentence when I joined conversations. My daughter called, gently suggesting I see someone about memory issues. Victor's groundwork was taking root. The only thing he hadn't prepared for was my refusal to wilt. One evening, while washing dishes, I saw the reflection of headlights pulling into the driveway. It wasn't Victor's car. A sleek black sedan idled there for a moment, engine running. A woman stepped out, tall, dark coat, phone pressed to her ear. Even from behind the curtain, I knew it was her. Sabrina Cole. She looked at the house as though she already owned it. Then she smiled, small and satisfied, before driving away. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room until dawn, hands wrapped around a mug of cold tea. The image of her face burned into my mind. She was real now, not a name on paper, but flesh and strategy. Somewhere between my husband's practice and her downtown condo, my death was being planned like a transaction. At breakfast, Victor said casually, "Sabrina might stop by this week. She wants to help us with a retirement transition." He poured coffee, never meeting my eyes. "You'll like her. Very professional." "Of course," I said, smiling. "I'll make lunch." Inside, something twisted tight and steady. If she was coming into my house, she would leave with a piece of evidence she didn't expect. That Wednesday, Sabrina arrived at 2 p.m. sharp. She was exactly as I imagined: crisp blouse, expensive perfume, confidence worn like armor. Her handshake was firm, her smile immaculate. "Mrs. Marsh," she said, "I've heard so much about you." I served tea and sat opposite her at the dining table, pretending not to notice how her eyes moved across the room, scanning photographs, measuring the space like a realtor. "So," I said lightly, "how do you know my husband?" "We've been working together for almost a year," she said, stirring sugar into her cup. "Victor's practice is valuable. I'm helping him plan the sale so you two can enjoy a peaceful retirement." "Peaceful," I echoed. "That sounds lovely." Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned, and excused herself to the porch to take the call. The moment the door shut, I picked up her teacup and pressed my napkin to the rim. I didn't know if fingerprints would matter later, but instinct told me to collect what I could. When she returned, she smiled again, too wide this time. As she left, she touched my arm. "You're very lucky," she said softly. "Not many women have husbands who think so far ahead." The words chilled me more than any threat could have. That night I called Marian. "It's her," I said. "She's here." Marian didn't hesitate. "Eleanor, we need to build a paper wall so thick they can't break through it." We met at the library after closing. Under the dim lights of the reference room, we assembled a binder: bank transfers, the consulting contract, the neurologist certification, the scheduled messages, every receipt and printed email we could gather. I made 3 copies, one for me, one for Marian, one for my eldest daughter, sealed in a letter labeled, "Open only if something happens to me." The next evening, Victor tested me again. We were eating dinner when he said, almost casually, "You forgot to lock the front door this morning." I hadn't. He smiled, taking another sip of wine. "It's all right, darling, you've been distracted." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "If you're so worried about my memory, perhaps I should start recording things." He laughed. "No need." But I saw it then, the flicker of unease in his eyes. For the first time, he realized I might not be as soft as I seemed. From that night on, I left my phone recording during every conversation. I started labeling files with dates and times. When he accused me of leaving the stove on, I had proof it was off. When he claimed I forgot a conversation, I replayed his own words back to him. Each recording was a nail in his careful illusion. By the end of that week, I had assembled enough evidence to show a pattern: manipulation, fabrication, intent. But I still needed one final piece: proof of coordination between him and Sabrina. That proof came in a whisper from the cleaning lady at Victor's office. I'd gone there under the pretense of dropping off lunch. While waiting in the lobby, she pulled me aside. "Mrs. Marsh," she said softly. "That woman, the one with the black car, she comes in after hours. They close the blinds. Last week, I heard your husband say something about the sedatives coming from her contact. I didn't want to get involved, but you looked kind." Sedatives. The word hit like a slap. My death wouldn't be messy. It would be medical. Something simple: an accidental overdose, an adverse reaction, a narrative everyone would believe. I thanked her and walked out, keeping my expression calm. But inside I knew they were moving faster now. Back home, I tore the evidence page from my notebook and replaced it with a new heading: Counterplan. Underneath, I wrote one sentence that steadied my hand even as it shook. "If they are writing the story of my death, I will write the ending myself." And from that moment forward, I stopped thinking of myself as a victim. I became the librarian who owned the only key to the archives, and I intended to decide who survived the final chapter. The knock came the following afternoon, soft but deliberate, 3 taps spaced like punctuation. I knew before opening the door that it was her. Only people who feel they already own a house knock like that. Sabrina Cole stood there in a charcoal trench coat, her hair pinned up neatly, her lips the exact color of danger, muted red, expensive, confident. She smiled as if we were old friends meeting after years apart. "Mrs. Marsh," she said, voice calm, low, persuasive. "I hope I'm not intruding. Victor mentioned you wanted to meet me." That sentence told me everything. He hadn't even warned me she was coming. He had handed her my name like a business card. "Come in," I said, though every nerve in my body told me not to. She stepped into my living room as if she'd been there before. Her eyes flicked to the framed photographs on the mantel: my children, my grandchildren, my husband in his white coat at a ribbon cutting. I could almost hear her measuring the value of every object in the room. "I've been helping Victor with the next phase," she said, placing her leather folder on the table. "He's a very intelligent man, you know. So many dentists fail to plan for retirement properly." I forced a smile. "Yes, he's always been a planner." She laughed lightly, but it was the kind of laugh people use to fill the air before saying something calculated. "He worries about you, you know. About your health." "Does he?" "He mentioned you've been tired lately, forgetful. He thought maybe you'd like to simplify things, move to a smaller place, closer to care. I think that's wise at your age." The way she said, "at your age," sliced through the air. I wanted to slap her, but I simply nodded. "Simplify," I repeated. "That's a nice word." She leaned forward. "Let's be honest, Mrs. Marsh. The stress of a big house, the finances, the practice, it's too much for one woman. Victor loves you. He just wants what's best." Her tone had changed slightly. I'd seen this method before. You disarm the victim with care, then tighten the net until she signs away everything thinking it's her own idea. I'd watched predators like her work in library archives, convincing elderly donors to sign temporary custody agreements for priceless family heirlooms. I recognized the rhythm: empathy, reassurance, control. I stood up. "Would you like more tea?" "Yes, please." As I turned to the kitchen, she slipped her phone out of her bag and started snapping photos of the living room. The click of the camera was almost inaudible, but I heard it. When I returned, I set the cup down harder than I meant to, spilling a few drops. "Sorry," I said. "No problem," she said smoothly, dabbing the spill. "I'll email Victor later to schedule a meeting with the notary. Once he files the new paperwork, everything will be easier." "Paperwork for what, exactly?" "Just standard authorizations, financial power of attorney, estate updates. It's better to finalize them while you're capable." She smiled as she said the last word. For the first time in my life, I understood what hatred feels like when it turns cold instead of hot. I nodded politely, waited until she left, then walked upstairs and locked the bedroom door. My hands were shaking so violently that I had to sit on the edge of the bed to steady them. They were moving faster now. She and Victor and I had very little time left before the story of my decline became legal fact. That night, I called Marian. She listened quietly while I told her about the visit. When I finished, she said, "Eleanor, you can't confront them yet, not until you have something undeniable. You need proof they're acting together." Proof. The word echoed in my head all night. At 2 a.m, I went into Victor's study. He kept his filing cabinet locked, but I'd lived with that man long enough to know where he hid every spare key. It was taped to the underside of his desk drawer, behind a roll of tape. The first folder I opened nearly stopped my heart. It was labeled Transition Plan, Phase 2. Inside were drafts of contracts, spreadsheets showing projected earnings from selling the practice, and an unsigned purchase agreement for a condo in Sarasota, the same city named in his scheduled text messages. The buyer listed was Cole Properties, LLC. Another folder contained copies of my medical records, altered versions, dates and notes added in handwriting that wasn't mine. I found one marked Cognitive Decline, Onset Notes. Attached was a typed summary signed L, Price, M.D. I knew the real Dr. Price hadn't written it. The grammar was too neat, too deliberate. And there it was, an email printed out between Victor and Sabrina. "The files are ready. Once she's deemed unfit, I'll transfer oversight to you under the trust structure. From there, we move quickly. She won't fight. She's too far gone." I sat back, clutching the paper until it wrinkled. My heart was pounding so loudly that I feared he'd hear it from upstairs. I replaced everything exactly as I found it, locked the cabinet, and crept back to bed. He stirred slightly when I slipped in beside him. "Where were you?" he murmured. "Bathroom," I whispered. He kissed my shoulder and fell back asleep. I stared at the ceiling until dawn. The next morning, I went to the local office supply store and bought a small recording device, the kind reporters use: cheap, invisible. I tucked it inside the flower vase on the kitchen counter. Every word spoken in that room would now belong to me. That evening, Victor came home early with takeout and 2 glasses of wine. "You've been tense lately," he said. "I think we should have dinner with Sabrina tomorrow. She can help explain some of the paperwork. It'll make sense once you understand." I smiled faintly. "That sounds wonderful." When he stepped out to take a call, I whispered to the vase, "Got you." The next day, Sabrina arrived again, her perfume heavy, her charm precise. They sat across from me, speaking as though I were already half a ghost. "Eleanor," she said gently, "if anything ever happens to Victor, you'll still be protected. but you must sign these now while your capacity is clear. Otherwise, the state might intervene, and you don't want that." I took the pen, turning it slowly in my hand, pretending to read the lines I already knew: transfer of estate authority, sale of property, medical guardianship. I smiled sweetly. "It's so kind of you both to think of me." When I handed the pen back, I let it drop. "Oh dear," I said. Clumsy me. As Victor bent to pick it up, I slid my hand across the vase, pressing the tiny button beneath the rim. The red light blinked once, then vanished. They never saw it. They talked for 40 minutes about the insurance policy, the timeline, the sale proceeds, every word etched into that recorder. By the time they left, I had everything I needed: intent, motive, and coordination. That night, I transferred the audio to a flash drive and hid it inside an old copy of Jane Eyre, a book Victor would never touch. For years, I had lived as the quiet wife of a respected man. Now I was the quiet hunter of two criminals who thought I couldn't read the script they'd written for me. But I could. And I was going to rewrite the ending before they even realized the story had changed. The morning after that recorded conversation, I realized something painful and absolute. Once you have proof that someone wants you dead, you stop being their wife. You become their project, their obstacle, their unfinished work. Every gesture after that is performance. Every word is strategy. Victor kissed my forehead before leaving for the office, just as he had done for decades, but the tenderness was a lie now, an act rehearsed for neighbors and children. I watched him from the window as he backed out of the driveway, phone already pressed to his ear, speaking to the woman I could no longer pretend didn't exist. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew the rhythm of betrayal by heart. I spent that morning listening to the recording, hearing their voices, calm and professional, discussing my death as a logistical step in their business plan. It burned into me deeper than any wound. They didn't even sound like lovers. They sounded like colleagues managing a transaction. Around noon, I received a call from my daughter, Karen. She sounded hesitant, rehearsed. "Mom," she said. "Dad called. He's worried. He said you've been acting strange, paranoid, hiding things. He asked if we could convince you to see a doctor." I closed my eyes. The story was spreading. The gaslighting was no longer private. He was building the world he'd need when the time came. The fragile mother. The declining patient. If I didn't act soon, his version of me would replace the real one. "Karen," I said softly, "do you trust me?" "Of course I do." "Then promise me something. If anything happens, anything at all, you open the letter in the bottom drawer of my desk. Don't ask questions until then." There was a pause. "Mom, you're scaring me." "I hope I'm wrong," I said, and hung up before she could hear the tremor in my voice. That night, Victor came home early again. His smile was too broad, his eyes too bright. "I talked to Dr. Price," he said. "He agrees we should have a more formal evaluation for you next week. Nothing invasive, just a short stay, observation. It'll give everyone peace of mind." A short stay. Observation. The phrasing chilled me. That was how it would happen. A medical incident, followed by sedation, paperwork, and the narrative of decline. No violence, no scandal, just quiet death by medication. I pretended to be relieved. "If it makes you feel better," I said, "let's do it." He smiled, satisfied, and poured me a glass of wine. But I watched his hand as he poured, the angle too deliberate, the swirl too practiced. I let the glass touch my lips, then set it down gently and said, "You forgot your phone in the car, didn't you?" He froze for half a second, then said, "I'll go get it." The moment the door shut, I poured the wine into the sink and rinsed the glass 3 times. When he returned, I was at the stove, humming softly. He never noticed. That night, I didn't sleep. I packed a small bag, cash, IDs, the flash drive hidden in the Jane Eyre cover, and the certified letter from Dr. Chen confirming my mental competence. I left the house before dawn, leaving a note on the counter. "At library. Back by 6. Instead of the library, I went to Marion's house. She opened the door in her robe, startled. "Eleanor, what?" "They're accelerating," I said. "He's going to try to put me in a hospital." Maybe tomorrow." She didn't hesitate. "You're staying here." "No," I said. "He'll find me. I need something official, something undeniable." Marion understood. "The police?" "Not yet. I need to build the case so tight they can't call it hysteria." We spent the day crafting a package printouts of the emails, the transcript of the recording, copies of the altered medical files, and a short affidavit in my handwriting. We addressed 3 envelopes, one to the county prosecutor, one to Detective O'Neill, the only female officer I'd ever spoken with at the local precinct, and one to my lawyer, who handled our estate years ago. Then we scheduled them to be mailed in 2 days, automatically if I didn't call Marion to cancel. By nightfall, I drove back home. Victor was already waiting in the living room. "Where were you?" he asked, too casually. "Library meeting," I said. "We're organizing a charity drive." He smiled, but his jaw tightened. "You should have told me," I called twice. "I left my phone in the car." His eyes flicked to the side table, to the wine glasses he'd already poured. "You look tired. You should drink something." He handed me the glass himself this time, watching too closely. I lifted it, pretending to sip, then placed it down on a coaster and smiled. "You know," I said, "I think I'll have tea instead. I've been feeling lightheaded lately." He didn't press me. He didn't have to. He thought time was on his side. The next day, I made an appointment with Detective O'Neill. I told her I wanted to report a possible case of elder financial abuse and medical fraud. She took notes, professional but skeptical, until I pulled out the flash drive. "I have a recording," I said. "My husband and his consultant planning the sale of my assets and discussing sedatives." She looked up sharply. "You have this in writing?" "In audio." She asked me to play it. When Sabrina's voice filled the room, smooth and clinical, followed by Victor's calm agreement, the detective's expression changed completely. "Mrs. Marsh," she said, "I need you to stay somewhere safe tonight. We'll open an investigation immediately." "I can't leave yet," I said. "He'll notice, and if he notices, he'll destroy everything." She hesitated. "Then at least let us install surveillance at your home," quietly. I agreed. By evening, 2 plainclothes officers had hidden small cameras in the living room and kitchen, and a panic button was installed under the counter. That night, I went through the motions again, dinner, conversation, pretending. But this time, the cameras were watching too. He mentioned the observation stay again, saying he'd already spoken with the clinic. "They'll pick you up next Thursday," he said. "Just for a week. You'll come back rested." I smiled and said, "Thursday sounds perfect." Inside, I marked the date as something else entirely, the day his world would end. For the next few days, I collected everything he touched, receipts, envelopes, cups, even strands of hair from his brush. I wasn't planning a crime. I was protecting my story. If anything happened, no one could call it paranoia. There would be physical proof. On Wednesday night, he made one final mistake. He left his laptop open while taking a shower. I copied every file I could find, financial transfers, correspondence with Sabrina, even the draft obituary he'd written for me. He'd saved it in a folder named Post-Transition Documents. The obituary began, "Eleanor Davis Marsh, beloved wife of Dr. Victor Marsh, passed peacefully after a brief illness." I printed it, folded it neatly, and placed it in my coat pocket. When he came downstairs, I smiled as though nothing had changed. "Victor," I said, "tomorrow, can we drive together to the clinic?" He looked pleased. "Of course, darling." I touched his hand, steady and calm. "Good," I said. "I wouldn't want you to miss the ending." Because by then, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was rehearsing my own reveal, one that would play out in full view of the police, the cameras, and the very woman who thought she could erase me. He had chosen Thursday as the day to end my story. I had chosen Thursday as the day to begin his. Thursday morning arrived bright and ordinary, which somehow made it worse. The world should have darkened when something like this was about to happen. But the sun was out, the air was clear, and the harbor below my window looked peaceful, like it had no idea what kind of reckoning was waiting to unfold that night. I dressed slowly, deliberately. A navy cardigan, slacks, hair pinned back the way Victor liked it when he wanted me to look composed. I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, "You're going to finish this today." There was no fear left. I had spent it all. What remained was focus and icy, measured calm that even I didn't recognize in my own reflection. When Victor came downstairs, he was in high spirits. "You ready for our little trip?" he asked, keys dangling from his hand. "They're expecting you at the facility by noon." Facility. Not hospital, not clinic. Facility. He said it like he was dropping off a piece of equipment for repair. "Almost ready," I said, smiling faintly. "I just want to water the plants before we go." He nodded, distracted, checking his phone. He was always checking his phone lately. Sabrina must have been sending him last-minute instructions. I walked into the kitchen and glanced at the small vase near the counter, the same one hiding the recording device. The police had installed additional cameras now, invisible in the corners of the room, and the panic button beneath the counter waited silently under my fingertips. All I had to do was press it once, but I wanted him to show himself first. I wanted him to speak his crime into the air where no one could deny it. At 11, he placed my suitcase by the door. "You've got everything you need?" he asked, too cheerful. "I think so," I said, then hesitated. "Would you mind if I made some tea before we go? I get carsick when I'm nervous." "Of course," he said, pretending to be tender. He reached into the cabinet for my favorite mug. I saw it then, the faint tremor in his hand as he measured the sugar, the small paper packet he slipped from his pocket when he thought I wasn't looking. He poured it into my tea, stirred twice, and set it on the table with a smile. "Drink up," he said. "We've got a long drive." I met his eyes and smiled. "You first. You made it perfectly." He blinked. "It's your tea. You know I hate drinking alone." For a moment he looked almost human again, hesitant, calculating, deciding whether to pretend or to insist. Then he laughed. "You're impossible." He picked up the cup, brought it to his lips, and paused. That was when the knock came. 3 sharp raps on the door, loud enough to make him jump. Victor frowned. "Who the hell?" I walked calmly to the door and opened it. Detective Marissa O'Neill stood there with 2 uniformed officers behind her. "Good morning, Dr. Marsh," she said. "We need to speak with you regarding an ongoing investigation." His face drained of color. "Investigation? What?" "May we come in?" she asked. He looked at me, bewildered. "Eleanor, what did you do?" "What I should have done weeks ago," I said quietly. The officers stepped inside. Detective O'Neill nodded toward the kitchen. "That's the cup?" I nodded. He poured it for me. Victor's voice broke into a desperate laugh. "This is insane! She's sick, she's confused. She's been paranoid for months, telling people I want to—" "Sir," the detective interrupted, "we have recordings. Multiple. Your conversations with Miss Cole, the altered medical documents, the draft obituary on your computer. We've verified everything." He froze. "You should also know," she continued, "Miss Cole was taken into custody at Portland Jetport this morning, attempting to board a flight to Miami. She's already talking." For a long second, no one moved. Then Victor's shoulders collapsed. "She said she'd handle everything," he muttered. "She said I'd never get caught." "Dr. Marsh," O'Neill said, "you have the right to remain silent." He turned to me, his voice raw. "Eleanor, I wasn't going to do it." She pushed. "Stop," I said softly. "You wrote my funeral date into your calendar." The officers took him by the arms and led him out. He didn't fight. He just kept looking back at me, mouthing something I didn't care to hear. When the door closed behind them, the house was silent again, the same silence as the morning he'd left his phone on the counter, but this time it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence that follows a verdict. Detective O'Neill remained behind for paperwork, methodical and gentle. "We'll need your statement again at the station," she said, "and we'll run a toxicology report on that tea." I nodded. "It's fine. I already know what it will show." She hesitated. "You're remarkably composed." "I've been preparing for this performance," I said, "for 42 years. When she left, I walked through the house slowly, touching the furniture, the photographs, the life that had almost been stolen. On the counter sat the mug, half full, still warm. I poured it down the drain and watched the liquid swirl away, carrying the last of his control with it. That night, I stayed at Marion's house. We watched the news together. The headline flashed across the screen: "Local dentist and consultant arrested in murder for profit scheme." They showed his mugshot, then hers, still defiant, even in handcuffs. I felt no triumph, only exhaustion. Justice has a weight to it when it finally lands. It doesn't lift you, it settles on you. Around midnight, Marion turned to me. "What are you going to do now?" I looked out her window at the dark sea, the reflection of the moon rippling over the water. "I'm going to live," I said simply. "That's the only revenge they can't undo." 2 days later, I returned home to find a small envelope taped to my door. It was from Detective O'Neill. Inside was a single photograph: Victor being escorted from the courthouse, head bowed, handcuffed. On the back, she'd written, "He won't hurt anyone again." I placed the photo inside my notebook, between the first page labeled Evidence and the last labeled Counterplan. Then I closed it and slipped it onto the bookshelf, between volumes of Austen and Bronte, where it belonged. A story about a woman who refused to die on someone else's schedule. That evening, as the sun set over Port Harbor, I stood on the porch and finally exhaled. The wind carried the smell of salt and pine. For the first time in months, I didn't flinch at shadows. The house was mine again, not because of the deed or the name on the mortgage, but because I had reclaimed the truth within its walls. I thought of all the women who had sat in this same quiet terror, doubting their instincts because someone told them they were overreacting. I wished I could tell them what I had learned, that paranoia is often just intuition that hasn't yet been proven right. Somewhere downtown, Victor was behind a locked door, and Sabrina Cole was likely learning what silence felt like in a concrete cell. But I didn't need to see them punished. I had already won. I had survived. When I finally went to bed, I left the window open. The night air drifted in, cool and clean. On my nightstand lay the obituary he'd written for me. I smoothed the paper, took a pen, and crossed out every line until only my name remained. Then, beneath it, I wrote a new one. Eleanor Davis Marsh survived. That was the ending they never saw coming. The courthouse smelled of paper and disinfectant, two things that never lie. They tell you where people have been, what they've touched, what they've tried to hide. It had been 2 months since the morning Victor was arrested, and though time had passed, the echo of that knock on my door still lived in me like a pulse. But today wasn't about fear. Today was about truth in a language no one could twist. When I entered the courtroom, the air shifted. Reporters whispered, "Pens ready." The clerk nodded politely, but I could feel the eyes, dozens of them, trying to reconcile the story they had read with the woman standing before them. They expected fragility. Instead, I stood tall in a gray suit, hair pinned back, posture straight. The same calm I used to quiet a classroom of restless children now steadied the entire room. Victor sat at the defense table, hands folded, a shadow of the man who once dictated the rhythm of my life. He looked older than his 69 years, his face drawn, his hair a pale imitation of its former silver. Across from him sat Sabrina Cole, poised even in disgrace, her dark hair tied neatly, her lips pressed into a line of practiced control. They didn't look at each other. They didn't have to. Betrayal has its own silence. The district attorney, Mr. Langford, called me to the stand. My steps echoed against the marble. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and met his gaze. "Mrs. Marsh," he began gently, "can you tell the court what prompted you to come forward?" "I found messages," I said, "on my husband's phone. Messages scheduled for months into the future. In them, he spoke of my funeral as though it were already over. He discussed the sale of his dental practice, the insurance policy, and his new life with Miss Cole." "And what did you do then?" "I documented everything," I said. "Screenshots, recordings, emails, bank transfers. I made a record of my own life before they could erase it." He nodded. "You were aware of the danger?" "Every minute," I replied. "But I understood something important. When people plan to destroy you, they count on your fear doing half their work. I refused to be afraid." He smiled faintly. "That's clear. The defense attorney tried to rattle me. He asked if I had ever forgotten appointments, ever misplaced my keys, ever felt tired. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Marsh," he said, "that your husband's concern for your health was genuine?" I looked him straight in the eye. If concern looks like forged medical files, hidden sedatives, and a signed purchase contract for property in another state, then yes, he was very concerned. A ripple of laughter passed through the courtroom. The judge tapped her pen once, but she didn't hide her amusement. The defense then called Dr. Price, the physician whose forged documents had almost destroyed me. He looked nervous, wiping sweat from his brow. Under questioning, he admitted that Victor had asked him to sign blank forms as a favor. He claimed he hadn't known what Victor planned to write on them later. I watched him avoid my gaze. That was his confession without words. When it was over, Mr. Langford played the audio recording from my kitchen, the one hidden in the vase. The voices filled the room, cold and deliberate. "She'll sign the papers," Sabrina said. "She always does what you ask." "Once she's in observation, it'll be simple," Victor replied. "A mild sedative, an allergic reaction. People die every day in those places." The courtroom went silent except for the hum of the speakers. For the first time since his arrest, Victor's composure cracked. He lowered his head, trembling, and whispered something I couldn't hear. When the tape ended, the judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Marsh," she said, "did you ever confront either defendant directly before involving the police?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I told them I knew everything. I gave them a chance to stop. They didn't take it." The trial lasted a week. The evidence was overwhelming: emails, financial records, the toxicology report showing traces of sedatives in the tea Victor had prepared that morning. Every line of proof was a thread I had woven myself, patiently, quietly, like a woman stitching her own armor. On the final day, I sat in the front row as the verdict was read. The foreperson's voice was steady. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty. On the charge of fraud, guilty. Victor didn't move. Sabrina's expression finally broke, her jaw trembling, a single tear streaking her foundation. For a moment, I almost pitied her until I remembered the calm in her voice when she'd spoken about my death as an inevitable step. When the judge sentenced them, she spoke with quiet anger. "You plotted to erase a life that had given you everything: trust, stability, companionship. You will serve your time knowing that the woman you tried to destroy built the evidence that convicted you." Sabrina received 25 years without parole. Victor received 12. I watched them stand, shackled, led away through the side door where defendants disappear into the gray corridors that smell of loss. He didn't look back at me, and I didn't need him to. I had already seen everything inside him worth seeing. Afterward, reporters swarmed. Microphones, cameras, questions. "Mrs. Marsh, how does it feel to see justice served? Do you forgive your husband? What advice would you give other women?" I answered only one question. "How does it feel?" someone asked. "It feels," I said, "like breathing again." When I stepped outside, the air was crisp with autumn, the courthouse columns glowing in late afternoon light. Marion was waiting on the steps, holding my coat. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "It's over." "No," I said, pulling back gently. "It's beginning." That evening, I returned home alone. The house felt different, not haunted anymore, but empty in the way a wound feels before it scars. I walked through each room slowly, touching the furniture, the photographs, the life I had built piece by piece. On the kitchen counter sat the same vase that had held the recorder. I lifted it, turning it in my hands. For months it had been my silent witness. Now it was just glass. I placed it by the window and poured myself a cup of tea. No sugar, no poison, no fear. As I sipped, I thought of all the versions of myself I had been: the obedient wife, the silent observer, the detective in her own home. And then I thought of the woman sitting here now, steady, alive, no longer waiting to be believed. Before bed, I wrote in my notebook again. I had filled every page except the last. On that final one, I wrote, "Justice isn't a moment. It's the slow return of your own name to your mouth." Then I closed it, set it on the shelf beside my novels, and turned off the light. Outside, the harbor was quiet. The waves moved softly against the rocks, as if the sea itself were whispering that survival, too, is a kind of victory. That night, I slept for the first time without dreaming of my funeral. Instead, I dreamed of the sound of the judge's gavel, sharp and clean, striking the wood like a heartbeat, proof that the world, at least sometimes, remembers to be fair. The weeks after the verdict passed, like the slow clearing after a violent storm, quiet, uneasy, too calm to trust. I woke every morning before sunrise, listening to the house breathe around me. For months, every creak and hum had meant danger. Now they meant something else, that I was still here, alive, free. The town of Port Harbor adjusted faster than I did. Neighbors who had avoided me during Victor's campaign of whispers suddenly appeared at my doorstep with casseroles and condolences. They spoke in careful tones, the way people speak to survivors of something they don't fully understand. I thanked them, smiled, and accepted the food I never ate. What none of them realized was that grief does not vanish when justice arrives. It simply changes shape. My children visited the following weekend. Karen arrived first, eyes red, her hands trembling when she hugged me. "Mom," she said, "I don't know how you did it. I believed him." I held her tight. "So did I whispered, "for 42 years. Daniel sat quietly at the kitchen table, staring into his coffee. When he called, he said, "I told him to stop talking about you that way, but he kept saying you were sick, that you needed help. I should have known." "No," I said softly. "You should have trusted your father. That's what children do. It's what I raised you to do." He looked up. "Do you forgive him?" The question lingered between us like smoke. "Forgiveness," I said, "isn't something I owe. It's something he'll never understand." After they left, I stood at the window and watched the harbor. The water was gray and restless, the way it gets before a storm. I thought of Victor sitting in a cell somewhere, counting the same days I was learning to live again. People assumed his punishment brought me peace. It didn't. Peace comes from rebuilding, not watching someone else break. That's when I began to plan what would come next. Marian and I spent long afternoons at the library, drafting the charter for what we decided to call the Eleanor Fund, a foundation to help older adults protect themselves from financial and medical exploitation. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was building something out of the ashes of my own betrayal. Each policy, each guidebook we created, felt like stitching a tear in someone else's future. The fund grew faster than we expected. Donations came from across the state, women who'd seen the trial on television, men who had watched their mothers lose everything to manipulative caregivers, even strangers who simply wrote, "You reminded me of my grandmother. She never fought back. I wish she had." But rebuilding isn't only legal or financial. It's human. It's quiet mornings and unexpected tears. Some days I caught myself setting 2 coffee cups on the counter, still half expecting Victor to walk in, humming off key. Habit can be cruel that way. I would stare at the empty chair and feel nothing, no hatred, no longing, just the faint disbelief that I had ever shared my life with someone who saw me as a problem to solve. In December, Detective O'Neill called to tell me that Sabrina Cole had requested to speak with me. "She says it's an apology," O'Neill said, skepticism in her voice. "I can arrange a supervised call if you want." I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "Set it up." The call came 2 days later. Sabrina's voice was calm, even measured, but thinner now, stripped of the arrogance that once filled every syllable. "Mrs. Marsh," she began, "I never meant for it to go that far." I said nothing. "He told me it was already over between you, that you were unwell, that he just needed help with the transition." I believed him. "You didn't believe him," I said. "You saw an opportunity." Silence. "Finally," she said. "I suppose I did. I wanted the money, the comfort. I thought I could control him. But he was weaker than I expected. When he started to panic, I realized I wasn't safe either." "Neither of us was," I said. "But the difference is I didn't choose it." She exhaled softly. "You're stronger than I thought." "I'm not strong," I said. "I'm just finished being afraid." When the line disconnected, I felt no satisfaction, only a quiet understanding. Evil rarely sees itself as evil. It just keeps making excuses until someone stops it. Winter in Maine is long and sharp. By January, snow had buried the garden Victor once tended. I stood at the window one morning, watching the flakes fall, and realized the house no longer felt haunted. It felt empty in a good way, like a canvas waiting for something new. I sold it that spring. The real estate agent asked if I was sure. "You could stay," she said. "Start fresh here." "No," I said. "This house was built on silence. I need walls that have never heard lies." I moved into a small condo overlooking the water. The first night there, I unpacked only 3 things: my notebook, a single framed photograph of my children, and a small ceramic vase, the same one that had once hidden the recorder. I placed it by the window not as a symbol of fear but as proof of survival. Every morning, I wrote for an hour. Not about betrayal or revenge, but about women who rebuild after both. Some of those stories made their way into local newspapers, then magazines. Readers sent letters, each one a quiet echo of pain and endurance. "You helped me leave. You reminded me I'm not crazy. You made me believe in justice again." One afternoon, I received a message from a community college in Portland inviting me to speak at a seminar on elder protection. Standing at that podium months later, looking out at a sea of young faces, I felt something shift inside me. The story that had almost killed me was now saving others. That was the real justice, the kind that spreads quietly, long after the gavel falls. After the lecture, a student approached me, nervous and eager. "Mrs. Marsh," she said, "how did you know when it was time to stop being afraid?" I smiled. "The moment I realized I wasn't fighting for my life anymore," I said. "I was fighting for the truth of who I was before someone tried to rewrite me." That night, back home, I opened my notebook to the last page and added one more line. Survival is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of authorship. Then I closed it, set it beside the window, and listened to the sea. The waves rolled in and out like breathing. I thought of Victor somewhere counting years, of Sabrina behind steel doors, and of myself 70 now, still writing, still alive. Justice had taken its course, but freedom was my own work, and for the first time since all of it began, I didn't feel like a victim of the story. I felt like the woman who wrote its ending. The years that followed were quieter, but quiet does not always mean peace. Sometimes it simply means that the noise has moved inside you. I was 70 now, living in a modest condo by the harbor, a place where the sea reached my windows and the light changed every hour. People called it a fresh start. I called it something else, a reclamation of time. After decades spent surviving someone else's schedule, I was finally learning how to live by my own. The mornings became sacred. I woke early, long before the fishing boats set out, brewed coffee, and opened the curtains to watch the horizon turn from gray to gold. There was something cleansing about that light, something that didn't ask questions about the past. I would sit with my notebook, the same one that had once held evidence and timelines, and fill it now with reflections, sketches of strangers, fragments of gratitude. Words became the proof of life I no longer needed to defend. People sometimes asked if I ever felt lonely. I didn't. Loneliness implies something is missing. What I felt was solitude, chosen, deliberate, nourishing. I had spent too many years surrounded by a man who made me feel invisible to ever mistake solitude for emptiness. Every Thursday, I volunteered at the library again, helping seniors navigate online systems, insurance portals, digital banking, medical forms. It was a small thing, but I knew how these systems could swallow someone whole if they didn't have help. One woman, 90 years old and sharp as a blade, squeezed my hand once and whispered, "You're the reason I didn't sign my house away." That single sentence stayed with me for days. The Eleanor Fund grew beyond what Marian and I had ever imagined. Local newspapers started calling it a quiet revolution for the elderly. We trained volunteers, partnered with lawyers, and hosted free workshops teaching older adults how to spot manipulation before it turned into control. Seeing those rooms filled rows of gray hair, cautious faces softening as they took notes, felt like standing in the center of a victory larger than any courtroom could give. But healing is not linear. There were nights when memories returned without invitation. The sound of Victor's voice, the reflection of his shadow in the kitchen doorway, the way my hands had shaken when I realized the man I shared a bed with had mapped out my death. Those moments arrived like small storms. I learned not to fight them. I brewed tea, opened a window, and let the air move through until the silence felt like mine again. Then, one evening, the phone rang. It was a call from the state correctional facility. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I thought it would be him. Instead, it was a chaplain. "Mrs. Marsh?" he said gently. "I'm calling to inform you that Dr. Marsh passed away this morning. Heart failure." It was quick. I stood very still, staring at the fading light over the harbor. "Was he alone?" I asked. "Yes," the chaplain said. "He had no visitors." When the call ended, I sat down at my small kitchen table, the one with the chipped corner, and waited for a feeling to arrive. Anger, relief, sadness, something. But what came was quieter than all of that. It was finality. The story had closed itself without my help. Later that night, I walked to the pier. The air was cold, the sea restless under a slice of moon. I thought about all the years I had given him the faith, the forgiveness, the loyalty. And then I thought about what those years had given me. 3 children, a lifetime of resilience, and the proof that even betrayal can be transformed into wisdom. I whispered into the wind, "Goodbye, Victor," not out of forgiveness but out of release. The tide carried the words away, and for the first time in decades, I felt weightless. The next day, I called Marion. "It's over," I said simply. She didn't ask what I meant. She just said, "Then let's do something with it." 2 months later, we expanded the foundation nationally. Donations poured in after a television segment aired about the librarian who caught her husband before he killed her. I hated the headline. It reduced everything to a spectacle, but the message reached people who needed it. Survivors began writing letters, telling their own stories of deceit and awakening. Reading them felt like standing in a room filled with echoes of courage. I realized then that the true measure of survival isn't how long you live after the danger ends. It's how much light you can bring to others still trapped in their own darkness. That became my purpose. One afternoon, while sorting donations at the office, I received a letter postmarked from upstate New York. The handwriting was careful, unfamiliar. Inside was a single page. "Mrs. Marsh, my name is Anna Price. My father, Dr. Leonard Price, passed away recently. Among his papers, I found a note addressed to you. He asked me to deliver it should he die before making things right." The enclosed note was written in trembling script. "Eleanor, I'm sorry. I should have stopped him when he asked me to falsify those records. Fear is a quiet disease, and I let it guide me. You were never the one who needed help. I was." I folded the letter, placed it inside my notebook, and wrote beneath it, "Even those who enable evil carry their own kind of punishment." By the following spring, the fund had enough resources to open a small community center, a place for seniors to learn, talk, and connect. We named it Harbor House. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same harbor that had once mirrored my isolation now became the symbol of safety for others. At the ribbon cutting, Marion nudged me forward to say a few words. I stood before the crowd, the sea behind me, and for a moment I forgot the speech I had written. So I spoke from the only place that mattered. "I used to think survival meant living through something terrible," I said, "but it isn't. Survival means reclaiming the part of you that was silenced. It means speaking even when your voice shakes, trusting even when the world has betrayed you. Every one of us here knows what it feels like to be underestimated, so let them underestimate us. That's how we win." The applause that followed was soft but full, like a promise kept. That night, I returned home and poured myself a small glass of wine. I opened the window, letting the salt air fill the room. On my desk sat a fresh notebook. The first page was blank, waiting. I wrote a single sentence. "I am not what happened to me. I am what I chose to become after." Then I closed it, turned off the light, and watched the moon shimmer across the water. I didn't know what the next years would bring, but I knew one truth that would never leave me. I had survived not by escaping my story, but by rewriting it and by making sure it could never again be told without my voice. It was 5 years after the trial when I realized that the story I thought had ended was only changing shape. The world no longer whispered my name the way it used to. The articles had faded, the cameras had turned elsewhere, and even the harbor outside my window seemed calmer, softer, as if it too had learned to exhale. But inside me, something still stirred an awareness that survival without purpose eventually turns into another kind of silence. The Eleanor Fund had grown beyond anything Marian or I had imagined. We had chapters in 10 states, volunteer lawyers, retired nurses, social workers, even college interns who called themselves guardians. They handled hundreds of cases, fraud, neglect, power of attorney traps. I saw pieces of myself in every victim's file. When people asked why I kept working instead of resting, I would smile and say, because rest is for those who never had to fight for their breath. That spring, I was invited to speak at the state conference for elder justice. I hesitated at first. I had long avoided stages and microphones. But Marian insisted. "It's time," she said. "You have a story that still belongs to people who haven't heard it." The day of the event, the hall was packed. Faces of all ages, students, advocates, police officers, judges. As I stepped to the podium, the lights nearly blinded me, but I didn't need to see their faces. I spoke to the invisible crowd inside me, the women who'd stayed silent too long, the ones who'd been told they were crazy, the ones who thought they were too old to matter. "I used to be a librarian," I began. "I believed every story had a beginning, middle, and end. I believed in order, in sequence, in truth. Then one day, I found out the person I trusted most had been writing the end of my story without my permission. That was when I learned sometimes survival means stealing the pen back." The room was silent. Then a single pair of hands began to clap, followed by another and another. It wasn't applause for tragedy, it was applause for defiance. When it ended, a young woman approached me backstage, tears in her eyes. She said she had just discovered her mother's caretaker had emptied her accounts. "I didn't know what to do," she whispered. "Until now." I hugged her and told her, "You start by believing yourself." Moments like that became my new life's rhythm, the pulse of purpose replacing the echo of pain. But life has a way of testing you, even when you think you've healed. That autumn, I received a letter from a small-town prison in Vermont. The sender's name stopped me. Sabrina Cole. She had been transferred there after the main facility closed. For days, I left the envelope on my desk, unopened, afraid of what voice might crawl out from inside. Finally, one evening, I made tea, sat by the window, and tore it open. "Eleanor, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know I understand now what it means to live in the cage you built for me, the cage of truth. I used to think you destroyed my life, but I see now you saved yours. I hope someday I learn to do the same." I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it in the back of my notebook. I didn't respond. Forgiveness doesn't always need to travel in both directions. Sometimes, leaving someone inside their own realization is the kindest closure. Winter arrived early that year. Snow blanketed the harbor in silence. My children visited often now. They'd built new traditions around me. Sunday dinners, phone calls that ended in laughter instead of worry. My granddaughter Lily, now 12, asked one evening, "Grandma, are you famous?" I smiled. Only to people who once thought they were powerless. As the years passed, my body began to slow, but my mind grew sharper, perhaps out of gratitude. I spent my mornings writing essays for the Fund's newsletter and my afternoons walking the shoreline with Marian. We talked about ordinary things, recipes, weather, her arthritis, but underneath, there was always that quiet, unspoken gratitude that we had made it to this chapter. One evening, as we watched the sun melt into the ocean, Marian said, "You know, Ellie, maybe you should write a book. Tell it all from your own voice." I laughed. "And what would I call it?" She smiled. "The Woman Who Refused to Die on Schedule." The title stayed with me. That night, I opened a blank document and began to type. But it wasn't a memoir, it was a story. A story about a woman betrayed by her husband, framed by lies, saved by her own clarity. I changed the names, the dates, the setting. I let her say things I had never dared to say out loud. And for the first time, writing didn't feel like recounting pain, it felt like reclaiming language itself. The book took 2 years. When it was finally published, the cover showed a simple image, a cracked teacup repaired with gold. The Japanese call it kintsugi, the art of mending broken pottery with gold to highlight the cracks instead of hiding them. It was, I realized, the perfect metaphor for my life. The book reached far more people than I expected. Libraries, book clubs, college classes. Letters poured in from readers saying it had given them courage to leave, to speak, to start again. That was the reward. Not fame, not pity, transformation. And then, on a quiet summer evening, long after the world had stopped asking about the trial, I received one final visitor, a man in his 40s, wearing a modest suit, holding his hat in both hands. "Mrs. Marsh," he said. "I'm Dr. Price's son. My father wanted me to thank you. He died last year, but before he did, he told me that helping you was the one decent thing he ever did. He said your strength changed him." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I only nodded, and when he left, I sat by the window again, listening to the sea. The horizon was the same, but I was not. Now, when I look at my reflection, I see every version of myself layered like pages in a book: the naive wife, the terrified woman, the investigator, the survivor, and finally, the author. Each one had to exist for the next to emerge. If I've learned anything, it's this: age does not make you invisible. Silence does. The world may not always listen, but truth has a strange way of echoing until it finds the right ears. As I finish writing these words, the tide is rising outside. The moonlight glimmers over the water, just like the night I first realized I was still alive. I close my notebook, the last one I'll ever fill, and whisper into the dark. It's your turn now. Tell your story before someone else does. Because survival is not just about living, it's about making sure your voice becomes the proof that you were here, that you mattered, and that no one, not even love gone wrong, had the final word. Life, in the end, always circles back to truth and how we choose to face it. Eleanor's story wasn't just about betrayal or survival. It was about reclaiming authorship, the courage to rewrite her life after someone else tried to end it for her. For decades, she lived under the illusion of love and loyalty, unaware that silence was slowly becoming her prison. But when she discovered the deceit, she did what most people never dare to do. She stood up not only for her life, but for her dignity. Her journey reminds us that justice does not always arrive as thunder or applause. Sometimes it comes quietly through a signature, a decision, or the simple act of refusing to be erased. Eleanor's revenge was not rooted in hatred, but in clarity. She turned the very tools meant to destroy her documents, lies, manipulation, into weapons of truth. And when she finally stood in that courtroom, she wasn't just proving her innocence. She was redefining what it means to grow old with power, not weakness. But the story didn't end with a verdict. The deeper victory came later, when Eleanor built the Eleanor Fund, transforming her pain into protection for others. That is the highest form of revenge, turning personal tragedy into collective hope. She proved that even when life breaks us, we can use the cracks to let light through. Her house, her silence, her scars all became symbols of resilience. The lesson for us today is simple but profound. You are never too old, too small, or too late to take back your story. The world often tries to define us by what was done to us, but real power begins when we decide what happens next. Whether it's leaving a toxic relationship, standing up to financial abuse, or simply daring to say, "No more," courage doesn't need permission, it just needs a beginning. So, if Eleanor's story has taught us anything, it's that survival alone isn't enough. The goal is to live with purpose, to turn the memory of betrayal into a blueprint for strength. Because one day, someone else might need your story to find their voice. Now, I'd love to hear from you. If you were in Eleanor's place, betrayed by the person you trusted most, would you choose forgiveness or justice first? Share your thoughts below so others can learn from your perspective. And if this story moved you, please like and subscribe to the channel. Every bit of support helps us create more powerful stories that remind us all it's never too late to fight back, to heal, and to begin again.